So we'll blow the man up and we'll blow the man down. Blow the man down. And we'll blow him away into Liverpool town. Give me some time to blow the man down. Give me some time to blow the man down. Give me time. Give me time. Give me time. Give me time. Give me time.
So Eric, tell us what you're researching.
I'm researching the relationship between environmental change and human settlement patterns between the Neolithic and early Bronze Age of the Humber Estuary here in northern England.
And what sites will you be using?
I'll be focusing on Rooscar and North Ferriby as my study areas.
Why did you choose this particular research?
I chose this area of research simply because I am very intrigued in using a lot of the cutting-edge technologies that we have, especially with landscape modeling. And using these areas, it serves as a great testing ground to show the true potential of modern sciences in archaeology.
Can you give us some background for the basis of your research?
Well, one of the earliest studies was released by Clement Reed, working in submerged forests back in 1913. But since then, others have taken up the call, per se, such as Cools in 1984 and Gaffney. And more recently, we have two researchers here in the British Isles, Fraser Stewart and Kieran Wesley, who are both doing recreation work of paleo landscapes.
What are you hoping to accomplish with this research?
Well, I'm hoping to highlight the relationship between dynamic landscapes and how humans adapt to them and change. Whether it's a more practical reasoning, whereas you have rising sea levels, thus you change your patterning, or is there some sustainability there? Are there other reasons besides rising sea levels that would tie humans to these specific locations, whether it is ritualistic or more practical?
And what is your focus? What are your objectives?
Well, my first objective is to create the paleo landscape, almost in recreating the environment in which the prehistoric peoples found themselves in. And the way I've been doing this is through ArcGIS and ArcScene and other programs such as RockWorks that allow me to model these environments. Then, afterwards, I'm going to run some spatial analyses on these environments on using the archaeological sites, which will allow me to see what factors really influence their sediment patterns.
Okay. So which case studies or sources will you be using?
Well, the BGS, the British Geologic Survey, has provided an extensive list of boreholes that allow me to build these paleo landscapes. In addition to that, I am utilizing the resources of Wessex Archaeology's former project, the Humber Wetlands Project, which was run during the early 90s, which captured a lot of archaeological sites there, and even captured more boreholes, which, again, let me use this data to reconstruct these landscapes.
Tell us about the areas of study.
Oh, yeah. All right. See which ones are North Ferriby and Rooscar. Well, the first study area is North Ferriby, where the famous early Bronze Age vessel, the Ferriby boat, was actually found there by Ted and Edward Wright back in the 1960s. And since then, there have been numerous early Bronze Age settlement sites there, such as trackways and evidence for stakes and buildings there. So we do know that there was a presence from the early Bronze Age to the Neolithic, and so we are going to observe why this place, even though in the midst of rising sea levels, was still occupied during this time.
Okay.
The second site of Rooscar, we see the opposite. We see that it was very occupied in the Neolithic, and there is plenty of evidence of sites for occupation during this time. However, in the early Bronze Age, we find less evidence of the area. Now, this also underwent rising sea levels. So I expect to find that there is less evidence there, but this may be a practical reason in comparison to North Ferriby.
Okay. Okay, you've kind of covered what you, what have you found in your research that really excites you?
Well, the amount of data itself allows me to create really detailed models, and that itself is very exciting for me. That, as well as the numerous amount of archaeology in the area, will allow me to give very detailed spatial analyses for this area. So this model, albeit it is predictable and reconstructed, it will allow me to create hopefully an accurate representation of this paleo landscape and paleo environment for the region.
Can you explain what's going on your screens?
I'll do. Well, on this screen here, we have the raster versions in ArcMap open up. We have the LiDAR, which is the modern-day landscape. And I have the boreholes plotted here, where I will be taking the information to recreate the landscape, as well as the archaeological sites in the area. On this map over here, we can actually see the LiDAR itself and the information taken from the boreholes. Simply by turning off the modern landscape, we're able to see the indentations and even some errors that may need to be researched a little bit more, and showing us the paleo landscape. And it is on this surface, not this surface, that we'll be running the spatial analyses.
So what elements of climate change are you investigating?
Well, for the environmental change, I'm looking at rising sea levels, and at the same time I'm observing the tectonic shifts, that and alluvial movement, sediment transport. And those are the factors that go into what changes the landscape.
Okay. All right, so here's my big question. Well, I say big because there's a lot of words.
This is the one, yeah.
This is the one. Okay, so do you hope that by potentially understanding the relationship people have with the environment in the past will influence our relationship and how we deal with the environment today?
The application and understanding of the relationship between humans and their environments is something that has always been going on. These dynamic landscapes are always changing. Even modern landscapes are changing, whereas roads are being built, places are abandoned, and those are all things that influence our perceptions of our landscapes and how we use them. So, especially with the situations of current rising sea levels in the world today, we are still facing this problem, albeit in a more modern way. And we can pull out the lessons and learn from the past and see how they adapted to meet this environmental adaptation.
Give me time, give me time, give me time, give me time, give me time to blow the man down.
The camera's on and rolling.